welcome to the Westland Scout and Wasp video. What are we going to be talking about in today's video? Well, first of all, we're going to just talk about the history of the Westland Scout and Wasp. Then we're going to talk about the differences between the two of them, and then jump into the simulator to take a look at some of the 3D and texture work on the exterior, then the interior, showing off some of the cool features and quirks of the helicopter. And then we're going to go for a quick flight, showing off some of the things we've modelled, how to operate it in a very basic sense, and also talking about operational helicopters in general. Finally, we're going to jump back to look at the Wasp, and that's going to be at sea, which is what you saw on the introduction, showing off some of the unique features for the Wasp and some of the cool things that we've done there. So, first of all, let's start with the history. Westland Helicopters was formed out of the post-UK Second World War climate of having many small aircraft manufacturers all doing fairly similar things. Now, this reached a head in the 1960s, so between 1959 and 1961, Saunders Roe was forced to merge with the rest of the helicopter market in the UK to make Westland helicopters. Now, the Scout is a development from the Saunders Roe P531 helicopter, so that's where it came from originally. Saunders Roe is actually a fascinating company. They were known for making large flying boats, and they also built the world's largest civilian hovercraft, the one that used to go between Dover and Calais and could carry cars. It was enormous. And that was all built on East Crows Island on the Isle of Wight. So East Crows on the Isle of Wight, which is their headquarters. The Scout's first flight was on the 29th of August 1960 from Southampton Airfield. That's what it is now, but it was also known as Eastleigh then. About 150 Scouts were made and 133 Wasps. They were exported all over the world. Quite a few people used them, but the main operator was the UK Royal Navy and the Army. Now, what is the difference between the Scout and the Wasp? Well, the Scout came first, and the Wasp is effectively a navalised version of the Scout. So things that you need adjusted, like the landing gear, some hooks and things like this, all the stuff that you need to operate from a ship was what was added, and that's why there's two different versions, but they are essentially underneath the same helicopter. Okay, let's jump into the sim to take a look now. We're going to start at the engine, work our way forward, and then end up back here, because I really think the engine is something of a sort of stand out visual aspect of the Scout, because it's just sort of planted on top. It almost looks like they didn't finish it by putting a cowling over it, but in the end of the day, it was about keeping the weight down, keeping the cost down. This was a general purpose helicopter that was used for training and also multiple other things, so it didn't need to be fancy. It needed to just get the job done, which this did. This is the Rolls-Royce Nimbus engine, weighs around about 300 kilos and has about 980 or 970 shaft horsepower, so pretty good. Now, we put a lot of detail into this because it's such a focal piece of the helicopter, but look, if I get close here, look at this. You can read exactly where this component was made from. I can move up here, read all of the decals, all of this, everything, and I can also just really look at all the steps, just there's a lot of detail. I love this mesh sort of intake because it really looks like, exactly as imagined in the real thing, giving it sort of that stopping the debris. Even look, little hole, little dink, as you would get with a sort of a worn helicopter like that. Up here we have oil specifications, so we can see how much oil should go in. Now, speaking of oil, the jet engine, like all jet engines, well, I shouldn't say all, like most jet engines, use a dry sump. So that means the oil is actually outside of the jet engine in a tank, and this is what this is here. And you can actually read the PSI here, and it will actually move when the engine is running. So these gauges are actually functional, and you can read again all these details all over here. Now, let's continue along. We've got the skids here. As I mentioned before, this is a general purpose helicopter, so we've got the skids with the wheel on the back, so we can do a sort of a rolling landing if we do need to, not from the full hover. We've got the navigation lights on there, so we've got the red one on this side and the green one on the other. As you can see, canopy and glass at the front is excellent, really excellent visibility, looking all the way forward around the top, and we also have a glass roof as well, which is kind of unusual. but really, like I say, sort of standard, really great visibility from a helicopter. We've also got these bobbles on the right and the left side of the observers, so they can kind of lean out, if you can imagine, and look forward to see if we're going to clear any of the obstacles. This side of the helicopter, fairly similar to the other, not too much different, just the oil tank is missing. But let's take a look at this main rotor blade, because this is a work of mechanical art and also really nicely represented in the simulator. You can see all of these different linkages, these weights, which, correct me if I'm wrong, they look like governors almost, to sort of counterbalance this. I might add, I am not a rotary pilot, so if I get anything wrong, you can let me know in the comments, because I'm sure you will anyway, but I'm a fixed wing pilot, so this is all fairly new to me, but also very interesting. Moving along the back, you can see not too many difference, just some more details all over, and we move towards the tail. Now, the tail isn't really what you would think of as a conventional from a aircraft. There's no rudder, there are no flight controls, of course, because the flight controls are in the rotor. But we do have here the tail rotor, or I think it's sometimes called like the anti-torque, because basically, like I say, I'm not an expert on this, but basically what it's doing is the main rotor blade, which is, you know, located here, is spinning and is creating sort of a gyro effect of trying to spin the aircraft around, and to balance that out you need the tail rotor, which is what this is spinning here. And you can see that there's a differential and a drive shaft that goes all the way down and into the back of the engine here with a gearbox. So there's actually a gearbox at the back of the engine. You can see the shaft coupling there. More details, fairly similar to where we started, and that is about it for a very quick overview. Now what you can do is from the cockpit, from the EFB, which we will show later, you can actually customize the exterior. So let's fully customize the exterior and we'll take a look. Okay, so we've now added everything that we can on the exterior, and you can see it almost looks like a different helicopter. So we've added on tags, so you can see on the front below the nose there, we've got sort of a red tag, one hanging over the back of the tail, so the remove before flight stuff, and we've also got the stretcher on the left side here. Now this is obviously for taking out medical evacuations, people from war zones that need to get moved to the forward operating base, and this helicopter could do that. We've also removed the doors. Now that might seem a bit extreme, but they were often operated without doors for easier visibility, easier jumping in, jumping out, and you can remove whichever door you want via the EFB, and you can see it's replicated on the inside and the outside. And finally, we've got the engine cover, which I love. It just is draped over it there with a little tie down, little knot there. So you can do that if you're going to leave your helicopter in sort of longer storage. Now, let's jump onto the inside and talk about the cockpit. Alright, here we are in the cockpit. First of all, we're going to start with the EFB, as I mentioned that on the exterior. Now what do? We see where the armament selection panel is. We click this little hidden screw, and here you can see the EFB. Fairly standard now, so we can look up METARs, checklists, ground control. So I'm going to undo everything that I did there, removing everything, and just leaving it as a standard helicopter. And on the map, you can see this is just where we are now at Farnborough. So, close the EFB, and we're going to start with an overview of the cockpit. So here we have the main flight control. So we've got the stick here. Now this is obviously adjusting the pitch, so forward, backward, left, right of the helicopter. And here we have the collective. Best way to think of the collective is not 100% true, but it's kind of like the throttle mixed with, the throttle is the separate twist grip here, but this is also adjusting the sort of power. That's the best way to think of it. And here we have the what would be considered rudder pedals. Now they're controlling that little tail rotor on the back to control the sort of spin of the helicopter. That's the best way I would describe it. Here we can see fairly standard instruments. This shows you that pitch collective, so the one that we were talking about, that's effectively the throttle, airspeed, pitch indications, some navigation instruments, VSI altimeters, and also yaw. Here we have the rotor RPM. Now this is obviously using the CFD flight model with inside Microsoft Flight Simulator, so you can actually stall the blades and all that nice stuff, where helicopter dynamics are really rather well represented in the sim, which is great, and that's all modeled here accurately. This is showing your torque, so how much torque is going on the on in total, and you can see it goes up to about 88, I want to say, and then we start getting to the amber and then the red range after that. Compressor RPM, this is all to do with the engines, so you can see oil pressures, all this sort of stuff like that. Fuel quantity and the ADF. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this because I think it's super funky and really, really cool. So if you want to set an ADF frequency, you have to set the band that you want. So 415 to 840, but we're going to set 360, and then you grab the little handle and you crank it until you get to what you want. I just think that it's pretty cool. Basically, it's just pretty funny how it does that. Moving on down, this is kind of our main instrument sort of slash electrical operations, and most of the switches are here. What we're going to do is we're going to turn on the battery, but I want you to take a note of this switch up here, so where it says battery off. Now this is actually kind of like a shutter board. So if you've ever been in an airport that doesn't have digital displays where you'd hear click, 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 that's what this switch is like. So if I show you now, if I turn it on, see how it goes to on, off, and like that. See, it has sort of multiple positions that you can have, and it's really, really cool. So I'm going to leave this on so we can keep looking at the other parts. Here we have the warning panel, so we can see that we're getting warning lights. Here we can sort of cancel the warning and we can do a warning test. So we need to remove some of these lights. Now how do we remove some of these lights? Now we can actually push in some of these circuit breakers, and you can see now that these start to go away. And I can also turn on the hydraulics here. So this is the manual power guard switch, which is on the collective itself. Moving on down, this is the radio, which I think is pretty funky as well. You can see how it kind of is like an old phone for dialing. So that's 1213, so 1218. There we go. Pretty cool. Transponder is down here. Now the transponder is also kind of funny. I know I keep saying this, but it works like an outer ring. So that's one, that's the hundreds, that's the tens, and that's the ones. So that's 11111, and here's the mode selector for it here. On the left side, there's actually less instruments than the right side. Now, why is that? Well, actually, in helicopters, the captain, as such, if you'd want to call them that, will fly it from the right side. So standard is the commander is in the right, and the other pilot or first officer, if you're flying it like that, will be in the left, unlike an airliner where it's reversed. Believe someone told me that is due to the fact that when you're landing a helicopter on a ship, you want the ship on your right side, so you'd want to pull up to the side of it and shimmy on over. That's where you sit in the right hand seat, I believe. Could be wrong, but sounded right to me. Moving into the back, just before we do that, actually, let's just take a look at the leather on this chair. I think it just looks gorgeous. Really, really looks like leather, like it should do. Not many amenities back here, but this is, just a 4-person helicopter. And we can see that we've got these little bubbles, the ones that we can stick our head into, and we've got this fantastic, I think, retro-y looking safety card. Like, you can really see it's sort of 60s, 70s inspired, and it's so high quality that you can get right up to it without losing any quality at all. That was pretty much a whirlwind tour of the cockpit here. To use the aircraft and set it up, we're not going to go through it today, but you'll be able to use the checklist system, and here the autocomplete function is fully usable, and this will bring you through everything you need to know how to start the helicopter. What we're going to do now is we're going to go for our quick flight from Farnborough, because that's where we're located today, for a quick flight around to show some of the features in the air, and we're also going to listen to the sounds of the helicopter starting up. So why don't you join me for that? So what do we need to do? We need to make sure that the rotor brake is off, and then we can move down here, select the starter to on, and then we're going to make sure we wait until the compressor RPM reaches 25%. short little flight now. Now, I am not a rotary wing pilot, so don't expect too much, but we're going to work through it together. So let's add in some collective. I don't know if you can actually see now, there is some dust building up around the aircraft now. Now, you actually have different effects for these when you're over dirt or concrete or tarmac. They're all custom effects. So still building up, putting a little bit of pedal in now. A little bit more power, and there we go. I'm now going to hover taxi over this way, a little bit more collective up, and nice and stable to fly. This is reminding me of when I was flying the Dornier. So there we go. I'm just going to lower the collective a little bit, and I want to go sort of fly by the tower. Alright, so we're going to try and come back and land on the runway now. Now, what we're going to try and do is either a hover landing, or we're going to try and roll the tail wheel on, because as you saw in the walk around, this has a little wheel on the back of the skid, which does allow you to sort of land it with a bit of forward motion. Not all helicopters have that, but the Scout does have that fitted. So we'll see whichever ones it transitions into. Now, what I'm also doing is, do you see my what would be the rudder pedals here in a fixed wing aircraft? I'm having to control those a lot, because as we get slower, you need more and more and more of that to counteract the yawing of the helicopter. So I'm going to bring it forward with a little bit more cyclic, because I want to try and land straight on the runway. So now I'm kicking in quite a bit of that, just to slowly transition us straight. A tiny bit less cyclic, so a little bit less what we consider power. And I'm going to basically hold that. A little bit less. Yeah, there we go, a little bit more down, a little bit more down. We're in a hover now, right above the runway. There we go, we're down. Definitely not the best landing in the world, but as you saw, we're on the centre line, we're back down, and I'm definitely not the most skilled rotary pilot in the world, so if I can do it, you can do it as well. And it's a really pleasant helicopter to try and fly, and those dynamics and physics are really well captured in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So now what we're going to do is we're going to transition to a ship, and we're going to be flying the navalised version, the Wasp, off a ship and back on again. So there's going to be a bit more of a challenge. Let's go then. Okay, so what is different on the Wasp variant? Well, I think the main thing that you can see sticking out is the landing gear. Well, it's more of a sort of undercarriage. Now, why is this changed? It's been changed to give a lot more movement, a lot more articulation, because when you're landing on ships at sea, the landing platform is going to be moving. So of course, you're going to probably tend to have a bit of a firmer impact. Now, this gives the helicopter a lot more travel. It's actually a bit more forgiving to land, so this is actually the easier helicopter to land. As you can see, the rear wheels are towed in. Now, reason for this is so that it doesn't roll, basically. So that's actually set up in the flight model, and a lot of drag is added to the tyres to simulate the fact that it can drag itself along the carrier, but it's going to be a little bit difficult. The other things that have changed with it are we have a few more options on the exterior, so we can actually have a set of floats that are attached, and we can also have the covers and all those sort of things that you could get on the Scout. On the interior, not too much has changed really, because like I say, this is effectively a navalised Scout version, and you can also see on the tail section here that there's a hinge which would fold the tail away. Now that would obviously for quicker stowage and also storage on aircraft carriers or ships in general. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a very short flight, take off and come back and land on this support vessel, and we're going to show off the SAS, the Stability Augmentation System, which is on both the Scout and the Wasp, but we're going to show it off right here. So join me for that. Alright, so let's do a quick takeoff. Now first of all, do you notice if I just raise the collective, do you see the helicopter raising and lowering? Now that's actually raising and lowering on the undercarriage because it's now got shock absorbers. So that's a little bit different than what we had with the Scout. So if I keep raising it, you see it's still on the ground, still on the ground, still on the ground, and now we've lifted off. So there's a lot more of a transition to the Wasp than there is on the Scout. Now, what are we going to talk about with this SAS? SAS stands for Stability Augmentation System. Now, if you want to have some assist to help fly the helicopter, the best way to do that is to go into the assistance options, and there are some assistance settings such as auto tail rotor control and auto collective control. Now, they will make the helicopter just easier to fly in general. The SAS is a real feature in the real helicopter, and it's sort of like an autopilot. So this is meant for people who want to fly it with the realistic difficulty settings, but something that would in the real helicopter. So first of all, if you're above 40 knots, so we're going to get up to around about 60 knots, let's say, or 50, something like that. So I'm just increasing down now, increasing the collective and pitching down. So you see we've got 40, 50, 60 knots, something like that. Now, what I should do ideally is make sure the helicopter's really in trim. And now I'm going to hold Z, so I basically hold the default autopilot engagement button, and I let go. And can you see now it's holding where I let go? So now I'm not touching it, I'm taking my feet off. And you can see it's yawing slightly, but it's able to correct it. It's holding level, and we're flying along. Now, what will happen as well, if I adjust the heading needle, can you see how it's going to follow the heading? And of course, it will dip in a turn because it's not a full proper autopilot. It's just an overlay helping you out when you're flying, right? Okay, so now I've enabled it when we were above 5 degrees of bank. And can you see it's not following the heading bug anymore? It's just following the bank that it's got commanded. So, you know, if you're flying around a target or you're looking for something, you know, you could enable that, and now we can kind of see I'm not touching the controls at all. Look, this is the helicopter doing it itself. Now, we're not going to go over all of the modes exactly, because when you're below 40 knots, it effectively acts as a pitch hold and a roll hold mode. So it's kind of assisting you when we're coming into land. But we're going to do a manual landing again. And all of this, like I said, is covered in the manual. So here we go. Now, has my skills improved? I will say the Wasp is an easier helicopter for me to land than the Scout because of the undercarriage. You know, once you get a little bit close, you can feel it touch, and then you kind of reduce the collector down, woof, it drops down onto the deck. Now, this is not an aircraft carrier, this is a support ship that we're flying towards. Now, if it was an aircraft carrier, you would be approaching it from, so I would have the aircraft on my right-hand side, approaching it, then I would shimmy in and land in the middle. But we're going to kind of come at an angle and land diagonally, because the boat's not moving, so we're kind of cheat a little bit, just to make it a little bit simpler for ourselves, because if you can imagine trying to land while this boat's moving, the superstructure at the rear would eventually hit us. It's stationary, so we're going to make it a little bit easier for ourselves. Reducing the speed back, a little bit too fast now. 40 knots on the collected, so 40 knots. There we go. There we go. 30 knots. Just a tiny bit less. A little bit more. A little bit less speed. A bit harder than doing it on the runway in Farnborough. On the rudder pulls when they're not. Power. And you can see, you can let it settle, now cut the power, boom, and then there we go, we're down on the deck with a little bit of a rolling landing, as you can see, because we've got wheels, right, so they're going to make us roll to a stop. Not the most textbook landing in the world, but still, you can see how landing this thing on a moving ship is more reasonable than doing it with the Scout. Now, that's actually about everything that we want to cover with the Scout and the Wasp today. As you can see, it's a really interesting helicopter. We've tried to model all of the sort of unique quirks and all the features that we have between both variants, and we hope that you can enjoy it and pick it up in the simulator as soon as possible. Thanks very much.